Hi everybody, welcome to Coffee, Tea or Sex. We have a very special guest tonight. She's the author of the new Rules of Attraction, and we're going to be talking about a very important theme. We usually see that in the BDSM scene, but it happens in everyday life, which is dominance and submission in your relationship, with the beautiful and talented Arden Leigh. Welcome, Arden.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited.
I'm really excited because although I come from a culture which is very, the woman is submissive and the man is dominant, I always thought of those terms like watching 50 Shades of Grey or like kinky stuff, that it's a little weird. So this is all new to me.
Oh, that's even better.
So what do you mean about like being submissive? What does it really mean? Starting with that.
Sure. Everyone has different dynamics for their relationships. So dominance and submission, I'm less concerned about finding a definition that works across the board, and I'm more interested in finding something that works for the people who are involved. There's so many different ways to have a dominant submissive dynamic in your relationship. And one of the things that I think is really cool about it is that you were just mentioning that in your culture, often women are naturally submissive and men are naturally dominant. And that's kind of a cultural mores that happens, kind of like a trend or just a pattern or whatever. And what I love so much about incorporating BDSM into my everyday relationships is that there's an acknowledgement there of the power that's happening. So it's like, if I choose to provide a service to someone or like make a meal or, do shopping for them or whatever I'm doing, it's not just kind of washed under as like, oh, this is just what we do. I actually get credit for it. My partner can be like, good girl, like that was so great. I'm so proud of you, and we have this dynamic where all of the labor that I'm putting into that relationship gets acknowledged by my partner, which is so nice.
So you mean being submissive, but being aware that you're doing that from your own power and because it feels good and not just because it's your culture or the belief system of the society you're living.
Exactly. You're doing it as a choice rather than as something that's just an expectation.
So men are usually dominant in the Latino cultures. I mean, mainly in a lot of cultures. What happens, like how can we start also like changing or shifting those roles and play, because we have both, right?
Yeah, of course.
So how do you do that instead of just like sticking in, I give you orders or call me mister? I don't know if that's true. Or
Why
I'm
not?
giving service.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, and you and I were just talking earlier about deprogramming our beliefs and deprogramming our cultural mythologies. And I think it's important to examine, if you're a man, for example, I think it's important to examine saying like, well, do I really feel dominant because it's coming from a place of a desire for pleasure in me that's real and authentic, and this is actually what I want? Or do I just feel that I have to be dominant because it's what toxic masculinity is telling me that I need to do? And I've met so many men over the years who have only really come to terms with the fact that every once in a while they maybe want to be submissive. They maybe want to let go of control and they maybe want to surrender. And they only give themselves permission to do that after they feel that they've been sufficiently dominant. They're like, okay, I've proven my masculinity. So now that I've dominated you like 6 nights out of the week, then maybe on the 7th night I can be the submissive one,
So being dominating, it's also a reinforcement of the masculinity, of that power of taking charge, of being the provider.
Yeah, I think that dominance and masculinity don't have to go hand in hand. And in fact, if you look at submission and masculinity, there are so many great ways to put that together too. And like one of the examples to me from our cultural narratives that's such a great example of powerful male submission is, do you remember the movie The Princess Bride? in which Wesley is always like, as you wish, you know, but he's so powerful. And he comes off and becomes the Dread Pirate Roberts, and he goes and basically lives his entire life in service to Princess Buttercup. But he's so strong and he's so masculine. So there's so many great ways to play with these tropes and be able to either be dominant or submissive and not have that say anything about your masculinity or your femininity, to be as masculine or as feminine and as dominant and or submissive as you choose.
Because there's also this perception about if you're being submissive, you're weak. If you're being dominant, you're super strong. And also it has like a bad connotation. Like even for me, hearing those words, sometimes it's like, that's a little weird. That means I'm wrong or it's bad. So can you touch base on that?
Yeah, of course. When you think about it, someone who is submissive is often sometimes even the stronger partner because they're enduring more, they're serving more. You know, they may not necessarily be taking control, but they are taking a lot of responsibility, you know, as is the dominant too. The dominant is also taking responsibility for steering the ship, and the submissive is taking responsibility for what gets done. So when I hear people be like, oh, submissive, does that mean you're weak? I'm like, no, let's look at all of these stories, all of these, you know, all of these examples that we can find in our culture of people who are submissive but are serving in a really powerful way, you know? Like The Bodyguard.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great one out there. There was a TV show called Dollhouse that I actually had a dominant submissive relationship that was based on, and it's a sci-fi show where you know you can program these human beings to become your fantasy or do whatever needs to be done. And in order to have all of those skill sets to meet those needs, you have to be incredibly strong and incredibly capable. So I know that there have been a lot of people who've asked me that question about like, oh, well, if you're submissive, how do you get over that stigma where it means you're weak? And I love talking about it because I love spreading that message that a submissive can be incredibly capable, incredibly dedicated to service, and really show up in a way that sometimes the dominant can't even do for themselves.
But this dynamic, it's pretty unconscious. Like people don't become aware they're doing that. So what are the tools or what can I do to be able to know what part I'm playing in that relationship, or even if I want to bring that relationship into my equality partnership?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, you know, it's like you're in equality, but you feel, you know, you need to feel more in control sometimes or be submissive. So how can we add that into what we have?
Sure. Well, I think it's a matter of acknowledging your desires. And if you have two people who are in a relationship saying, hey, you know, kink is so prevalent in our culture nowadays, you know, when 50 Shades of Grey was
an eye-opener.
It was certainly, yeah, it was that. It was absolutely that. It was certainly indicative of our culture looking at things and saying, oh, hey, we're attracted to this. We're interested in this. What's going on here? And having that opened a really big discussion for people to be able to say, hey, this is something we want to try. This is something we want to play with. So I think that acknowledging that you're trying something, acknowledging you're trying out a role, you're trying out a dynamic is really important, because again, that brings it into the conscious mind and it becomes something that is done more deliberately and intentionally than the dynamics you mean where it's just like, oh, he's taking control, or I'm being submissive, or I'm following his lead, or what have you. By doing it intentionally, you're making it a very conscious choice between two partners.
I think boundaries are important because then how you don't feel used or how you don't feel you're manipulating someone. Because I think in order to play this dynamic, it has to feel good for both of the people involved instead of hurting someone or feeling ashamed or used or manipulative, or, there's like so many feelings and emotions that are, like in tune with those words.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I think that that's where it really starts to come up, where it's the role of the submissive in a way, and the dominant too, but I think the submissive in particular has a responsibility to themselves and to their partner to have really clearly defined boundaries about what they're willing to offer and what they're not. And I think that's actually a great thing to do.
Like Christian Grey's contract?
Yeah, well, yeah, right. I read about that, this elaborate kind of thing. But I think it's something that people can do even before they get into a relationship, is start to think about, what, if you're a submissive, what kind of service do you want to offer your partner? Like, what is on your menu, for example? Like, if you're a restaurant, let's use that analogy, if you're a sushi restaurant, you're probably not going to be serving like barbecue, and vice versa. So many submissives will make the mistake of getting into a relationship and just be like, oh, whatever you want, you just tell me what to do and it's fine. And then they end up running into walls because it's like, oh, well, I actually wasn't okay with that. So the more you can really check into yourself and be like, what are the things that I want to offer? Like, I think even it's smart to make a checklist sometimes and give it to a partner and be like, hey, these are all the things I'm really good at. Feel free to ask me for these at any time. But you know what? I don't really want to wash your windows, to be honest with you. Doesn't get me off.
Because there's like telepathic agreements when we enter in our relationship. It's like we're so in dopamine that we like don't think about stuff when we go into relationships. But we also are afraid to communicate our desires in a relationship. So that's self-empowerment, and you need that power to get into this dynamic. I understand that, or?
Yeah, I think that it is easy to get caught up in all of those feelings, and especially if someone has a tendency towards submission anyway, which I know that I do. And I know that this has been in my past relationships. This is exactly an issue that has come up for me that you bring up, where you have so many strong feelings for someone that you want to give them the world, and you end up burning yourself out because you're giving and giving and giving so much. And the dominant is just like, well, I thought this is what we do. I thought that everything was fine. You just keep giving and giving, and I just keep taking, and that's what we do, right? And that's not really how it should work, There is something to be said for receiving gracefully when you're a dominant, but it's also it's a power exchange for a reason, There's also a lot to be said for giving appreciation, giving acknowledgement, giving credit, and for the submissive being able to say, this is what I'm willing to do for you, and this is how I'm willing to show up, and I'm going to stick to these boundaries so that I don't burn myself out and give too much.
How do you know what are the traits of a submissive personality?
That's a good question. I don't know that. There's a lot of people in the world who are incredibly dominant in their everyday lives, and then when they're in their primary relationship, they want that safe space to surrender. And then there are people who might have more traits of being more of a follower and showing up and serving rather than taking the lead, even in their everyday lives too. So I think the thing that makes you a submissive or a dominant is just the fact that you choose to be.
It's a choice. What kind of experience do I want to have today or in this relationship? Exactly.
It's kind of like any way that you identify. It's not any of my business to tell you who you are or how you want to show up,
So bringing that energy of the submissive dominance talk into the bedroom.
Yeah.
Why are we so afraid if it happens naturally? Like, how does submission, dominance happen biologically or naturally in sexuality?
Yeah. Bringing that language, like how we can better bring that language into the bedroom. I think, again, it's about, we live in such a sex negative culture. There's so much shame around our sexual desires. And especially, and it's a very gendered kind of shame. There's equal shame on the parts of men and on the parts of women, but it tends to show up in different ways. For women, it's shame around being too sexual, too available, too slutty, too easy, or all that stuff. Having too much desire, having too much of an appetite, and not resisting enough. And then on the part of men, there's shame around like, well, Am I too aggressive? Does that make me creepy? Am I a bad guy? Am I too dominant? Am I taking advantage of this woman? And similarly, there's also a shame in the other direction for men where it's like, well, am I not dominant enough? If I do want to surrender, if I want to be the submissive partner, or just even if I'm not feeling that sexual, if I'm not feeling that much like I want to have sex or want to be a leader, like am I not measuring up enough as a man, you know? So masculinity in our culture is such a fine line for men to walk, you know, too much and they're, you know, a creep or a rapist waiting to happen, and not enough and they're, you know, they're gay, they don't have their man card or what have you. So when you take these two highly flammable, like shame balls and put them together in the bedroom, and you ask them to communicate with each other, it's incredibly brave, it's incredibly vulnerable for two people to really own that. And I think the thing about dominance and submission that is so awesome and authentic, but also so challenging, is that in order to really get what you want, to ask for what you want, and to put that out there requires you really dropping into your body. And especially as the dominant partner, dropping into your body and saying not so much like, what does everyone else think of me right now? What does society think of me? What does culture think of me? What does my partner think of me? You know, but to drop into your body and say, what would bring me pleasure right now on any level, whether that's physical or emotional or spiritual? What will serve me in this moment? And do I have the bravery to ask for that of my partner? You know? And that is an act of courage, let me tell you.
I can imagine, because even to speak your desire takes a lot of courage, especially when it comes to kink and exploring, you know, all the beautiful ways that we explore sexuality if we're free. But I think we have to start with those belief systems and like you say, learning to drop into our bodies and really see what we desire. But if somebody doesn't know how to drop into their body, how can we do that? Like to really go deep and say, this is my desire, this is my fantasy, and to actually share that with your partner.
Yeah, I think that cultivating mindfulness is really helpful with that. And I know that you've had some other experts on the show who are definitely great at that. Okay, you know, let's quiet all the voices and really tap into what I'm feeling. And that's definitely a practice. That's a practice that you can do in your everyday life. It's like, do I want coffee right now? Do I want coffee, or do I just think I want coffee because I'd have it at this time every day?
Yeah.
Coffee, tea, or sex?
Yeah,
exactly.
Or sex. Yeah. What do I really want at this moment?
I want all three. Yeah, and it is, and it's incredibly vulnerable to do that and then put yourself out there in that manner. But it's really the way that we cultivate honesty in our relationships. You know, I was a professional dominatrix for many years in New York City when I lived there.
I know that, and I was looking forward to say that, so I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, yeah, which you know gave me a lot of perspective on how these kind of things work. And one of the reasons I ultimately stopped that work and became an author and an educator was I saw so many men who were coming in as clients to see me because they couldn't tell their partners about the things that they really wanted to do. And I felt so sad about that. I was like, this is a sad state of affairs for our world to be in, and this is the thing that we need to change. We need to give people the better communication skills to talk to their partners in their own bedrooms, because otherwise it's just these secrets create rifts in your intimacy, and it's just not fun, it's not healthy, and people are sad.
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful what you share, because we have this context, like the men are fine with this dynamic and women aren't, and now we can see men are not sharing their desires. We're shaming our partners because they want to create like a kinky scene, or they would need something more visual, or they want to pull your hair and give you orders, in a play role. So why do you think women shame men in this case so much about having those fantasies?
I think in some cases women are so accustomed to having to defend against their own slut shame that there may be things that deep down inside they're interested in or they're curious about, but they're afraid if they admit that too, that their partners are going to judge them, you know? Oh, well, you know, of course, the Madonna whore complex, this idea that a woman can only be an angel or a devil. You know, she can only be the mother of your children or the woman that you get off with, and never the twain shall meet. And women are so worried about losing the respect and the security of their relationships that they're afraid if they go into this potentially slut-shamey territory that they're going to lose all of that. So I think that can come up a lot and cause women to inadvertently shame their partners for their desires just because they don't want to be seen as agreeing with that and going along with it and losing their respect.
Now that you talk about respect, I think this is a great opportunity for respect because you really have to be in tune with your partner, honor the desires, honor the boundaries. So that's pure respect talking here.
Yeah.
So what other attributes this dynamic lighten up in our body? Like respect, what else can we have there?
Yeah, respect, trust.
Trust.
So much trust.
That's a huge one.
Yeah.
Trust, because sometimes we don't want to let go of control, right?
Exactly. And when we go to those scary places with someone, it just highlights how much trust we have in them to allow them to take us there, which for me is why it's so sexy, you know? Because you're playing on that edge. You're playing with that danger, not just physically, because certainly in BDSM there are physical aspects to it that you have to know how to do safely, but also emotionally, you know, for people who are into things like humiliation or degradation. It's like, wow, I'm allowing my partner to see me at this low, humiliating place, and they still love me. Wow. Right? Because it just highlights that intimacy that's there, that they can push you to that place where you might feel embarrassed or like you're not your put together self that the rest of the world sees. You know, you're in this compromised position and they still love you after all that. Maybe they love you even more because you're willing to go there and be vulnerable for them. And it's really beautiful.
So one of the myths is precisely that. It's like, why does this people, like, you know, the dominants, enjoy humiliating others?
Yeah. There could be so
it's
many
not really
reasons,
a joy.
right?
What is it?
Oh man, it could be so many different things. You know, I've known a number of dominants who who look back and say, yeah, the reason this gets me off is because I grew up with certain attitudes from my parents, or I knew one dominant who was a mentor of mine who said, you know, I grew up in a 70s era second wave feminist household where I was punished just for being a man, you know? And so now I'm reclaiming my masculinity, I'm reclaiming control by taking on the dominant role in the bedroom and by being willing to have partners who are willing to serve me and to he's like, for me, I feel like that therefore puts my past on a more even playing field, you know? And the fact that he's acknowledging all this and doing it in a healthy manner with women who, for whatever reason, are also seeking out that kind of control and that kind of extremity or being pushed is really wonderful, because unexamined, those impulses can certainly lead to harmful behaviors, unconscious behaviors, we'll say, that can potentially lead to damage if everyone is not there as a choice. But when you really examine it and say, I'm going to make sure I get consent for everything, I'm going to make sure that this is who I am and I'm not right for everyone. So if this is your thing, here we are, you know, and being able to do that in a way that's healthy.
So a lot of people don't go into this dynamic, especially in sexuality, because they're afraid of being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because in either way, I think you're in a vulnerable position. Either you're power, you know, and so controlling that you have to, like, you know, respect the boundaries. Mm-hmm. That's being vulnerable, and also just that surrendering of, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yep.
And the trust.
Yeah.
So that you think that's the biggest fear around exploring this kind of dynamic?
Yeah, I think I would say vulnerability is one of the scariest things about sex in general, even about vanilla sex. Because for us to say, hey, this is a thing that I want, this is the thing that I want to try, which both partners really need to do in their sex lives in order to have that intimacy and that fulfillment. You risk rejection, you risk being shamed, by putting your desires out there. Your partner can look at you and be like, ew, that's weird, why would you want that? Or, and that hurts, that hurts a great deal. So there are so many people out there who are having the kind of sex that they think they should be having just because they're afraid to ask for the sex that they really want.
How do I know what kind of sex do I want? Especially since my reference point is like missionary or doggy style,
Sure.
3 positions. And then, I see this and it freaks me out. It's like, yeah, you're like, For me, it's like chains, sacrifice, guilt, pain.
Sure.
Like I see these pictures and that creates that in my body because I don't have a reference point.
Yeah. I think there are plenty of reference points in our culture, and like in the films we grow up with, there's so many different fictional power dynamics between characters. And I think the way to really figure out what you want is what crosses your mind in those last several seconds before orgasm when you're fantasizing alone. That there's always that core story in each of us that we come back to.
One. Yeah.
Yep. It's like, like when you're getting off and you're, maybe you're watching porn or you're reading erotica or you're just fantasizing about a lover. And then there's always that story that is like, if all else fails, I know this will get me off. It's like in those last couple minutes before you have that orgasm, where does your mind naturally want to go? And that's the biggest clue, I think, to what your authentic sexuality really is, because it's the story that works for you.
So starting up, let's say you're listening to the show and you're open to explore and see what this is about. So can you give us a couple of examples of subtle things or beginning kits to start, this dynamic in sexuality?
Yeah.
Because, I see that and I'm a little afraid, but maybe I can start with something simple.
Sure, absolutely. I think the key to it is bring it up to your partner in a way that is fun and playful and it doesn't have to be too serious. And the nice thing about the past couple of years in our culture is that we really have seen kink come into the mainstream. So it's so easy to bring it up nowadays where it's like, oh, I read an article, that's interesting. Is that something you'd ever want to try? Or even seeing, the dynamics play out between 2 characters in a movie. Or I love going on Tumblr and looking at all the photos exactly like that one. and saving them to my phone. And then when I have a lover or a new relationship where that comes up, I literally just show them, like, here's my porn folder. Like, here are the photos that I saved that I thought were sexy. So, there's your menu. There's like whatever you, and any of these that you want to show up for, any of these that also inspire you, you have my permission.
So
like you're like creating a mood board for the kind of sex you want to have.
Oh, I like that, the mood board. And then you put it all over your fridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So when you think about having chocolate or coffee or tea, you just open the fridge and you're like, oh, maybe we could do
that's
this tonight.
tonight.
and I think it gets the energy, going.
Yeah, and that's
because it's something new. It's a first time. I told you this before we came on set. I was like, I'm excited because this is a first one for me. This is very different to what I've talked about and teach,
Yeah, and it's so much fun. And I think it's the nice thing about a dominant submissive dynamic that you can put into your everyday life is that it takes your sexuality and it makes it something that is pervasive in your relationship and not just for the bedroom. And if you want to have just a submissive dominant dynamic in the bedroom, that's fine too, because everyone can play at the level that's right for them. But the thing that I like about having that as being part of my everyday life is that, someone I'm dating can say something to me and And I can just respond, yes, sir, you know? And even if it's just that comment, there's that sexuality, that flirtation to it that reminds the both of us of that dynamic, and it infuses our everyday interactions with this sexuality and excitement, you know?
So does this boost the emotions? Because I mean, I keep seeing the pictures and I'm just blown away. But these emotions are stronger or less subtle than, you know, just like the touch of your hand or a massage. So this means your chemicals in your brain also work. Like if I'm in a monogamous relationship, this could be support to spice up my life, my sexual life.
Yeah, I'm so glad
create that passion.
I'm so glad you brought that up, actually, because there's so much fascinating research about the brain on BDSM. Like we could actually,
please tell me about it.
Oh man, we could make that like a whole episode. Basically, and I'm going to get really sciencey and boring right now, is what happens when you're in an altered state of consciousness, and it's very, you know, and specifically in this one, I'm thinking of sadomasochism. So the idea of especially receiving pain, but also being in a place where you're curating pain, you know, as well, and or at least sensation. You know, let's take the pain stigma away from it. The intense sensation, right? And what happens with that is that your body, if you're receiving that sensation, will produce chemicals to kind of compensate for the impact that it's receiving, right? So not only are you receiving a rush of endorphins, but you actually enter into this state where there's blood flow that's directed away from the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for making executive decisions, and interestingly enough, distinguishing self from other. So there's a very real feeling of bonding with your partner that happens that's actually quantifiable by stuff that is happening in your brain. And that's why also when we, there's so much connection between kink and spirituality, for example, too, because when we go into trance states, when we, if we meditate or if we practice, you know, like conscious tantra and stuff like that, that's so very similar to what is happening in our brains with kink as well. It's that altered trance state that we can also get there through ecstatic dance, you know, we can get there through meditation, through hypnosis, which hypnosis can be its own fetish in itself, you know. That can be a really fun thing to play with in a relationship if you're doing it, you know, responsibly. But there's so many ways of getting to that, and I think that is why there's that overlap. And I do think that's why there can be that intensity of emotion. It's not only there is a sense of vulnerability when you're there with your partner and you're really talking about your deep dark desires. But it's not just psychological. There is a chemical thing happening there too, and it's
fascinating.
It's fun.
Yeah, no, we have to come back and we have to talk about that.
Yeah, that would be great.
I mean, and that's the beauty about sexuality, and I think, you know, about all those themes that are so foreign to the majority of people is to be informed, educated. Yeah. To really, you know, understand what's happening. And I think to be conscious and have consent.
Yeah.
I think consent, it plays a huge part, especially if you want to go in this type of kink.
Oh yeah, consent is crucial. You know, you remove consent from BDSM, it becomes assault, and you remove consent from sex and it becomes rape. You know, anything that you're doing to someone, always, you know, explicit verbal consent is important, I think. Yeah.
So you travel, you know, around the States and the world, like educating people, especially about this kind of dynamics.
Yeah, you know, and like I said, when I was a pro dom in New York, I just saw too many people who were unhappy because they couldn't tell their partners about their true desires. And I think that is one of the greatest ills facing our culture, especially American culture today. You know, there's so much shame around sex where we're obsessed with it on one level. We use it to sell things, you know, we use it to further a consumerist agenda. But when it comes to our own pleasure, we're so disconnected because people are constantly telling us we're weird or we're wrong, and it's, you know, everyone's weird, so everyone's normal. Which means if everyone's wrong, then everyone's right.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means, right? It's like, who cares? We're adults. We get to have the kind of sex that we want to have with our consenting partners, you know? Nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares what kind of sex you're having.
I care. No, but I care. I think
you don't care what kind of sex I'm having, really, you know?
Oh, I'm super curious, actually, because it's like I don't have any reference points. So if I'm interested in exploring this, I reach out to experts or I reach out to people who can create those reference points for me.
Yeah.
Because right now that you share also like that spiritual part, the chemistry, it's giving me more information than it's just like, oh, it's bad, it's a kink. That means like this guy is gonna be controlling in all aspects of my life and I'm gonna have to say yes or vice versa.
Yeah,
so it's giving me, more mobility, to really take a choice.
Oh,
so
I'm so happy about that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
I want to try it out. So I want to invite you to another show.
Yes.
So maybe we can play a little bit here.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Are you kidding? Twist my arm.
Okay, so you have to come back for some more sex, Arden.
Absolutely. Coffee, tea, or sex.
Exactly. Let's start with sex. Thank you. Where can we find you and hear about your workshops and your book?
Oh, yeah. My book is The New Rules of Attraction. It's on Amazon and at most Barnes & Nobles. And my blog is Arden Leigh, ardenleigh.typepad.com. And you can also look at my coaching site at seductionsirens.com.
Oh, and your Instagram, which I love.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Arden Sirens. So,
Sirens.
Yeah, ARDENSIRENS. Yeah.
Ooh, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed
thank
your
you for
company.
Me too. Thank you.
Yay, so see you next episode. Enjoy your coffee, tea, or sex every morning and every night. Why not?